The Thompsons, an elderly couple from our church, were off to their son's place for Christmas. They asked me to house sit. Their house was a cosy little place, filled with the warmth of countless Christmases past. It was an honor to be trusted with their home. I walked in, greeted by the crackling fireplace. The Christmas tree shimmered with ornaments, each telling a silent story. I placed my bag down, a sense of peace washing over me. The aroma of cinnamon and pine filled the air. It felt like Christmas even though I was alone. The silence was unnerving at first, but then I began to enjoy the solitude. I curled up on the couch with a book, the fire's warmth enveloping me. For a while I lost myself in the story. I almost forgot I was alone, until I heard it, a gentle tap, tap, tap on the window pane. My heart skipped a beat. I looked up, peering into the darkness outside. The neighborhood was quiet. Christmas lights twinkled on snow-dusted lawns. Families were inside, gathered around their own fireplaces. I was alone. A lone soul in a house full of memories. I walked around, familiarizing myself with the layout. The kitchen was spotless, the aroma of Mrs. Thompson's baking still lingering. Family pictures lined the hallway, each one a portal to a different Christmas. I felt a pang of loneliness. I missed my family, miles away. I decided to make myself some hot chocolate. The warmth spread through me, chasing away the chill. I sat by the window, watching snowflakes fall softly on the ground. It was then that I noticed him. An old man, bundled up in a thick coat, standing across the street. He seemed to be watching the house. He stood there for a while, a forlorn figure against the backdrop of falling snow. Then he started walking towards the house. My heart started to pound. Why was he coming here? The doorbell rang, a jarring sound in the stillness. I jumped, my heart racing. I peeked through the peephole. It was the old man. His face was etched with wrinkles, his eyes watery and pleading. He looked harmless enough, but something about him made me uneasy. I hesitated. Should I open the door? What if he needed help? But then again, it was late and I was alone. My instincts told me to be cautious. "Yes?" I asked cautiously, my voice barely a whisper. "Please, son," he croaked, his voice raspy. "It's freezing out here. Could you spare an old man a cup of warm milk? My bones are chilled to the core." His request seemed innocent enough, but there was something in his voice, a desperate edge that set me on edge. I decided to trust my gut. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, my voice firmer now. "I can't help you. Maybe you should try the neighbors." He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with those watery eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why wouldn't he leave? "Please, son," he pleaded again. "I won't take much of your time. Just a cup of warm milk, that's all I ask." I shook my head, my grip tightening on the doorknob. "I'm sorry, sir, I can't open the door. It's not safe." He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped. I watched him go, a wave of relief washing over me. But it was short-lived. A few minutes later, I heard a noise at the back of this house. A scratching sound, like someone was trying to pry open the window. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace, my hand trembling. I crept towards the back of the house, my senses on high alert. The scratching sound grew louder, then I heard it. Footsteps, heavy footsteps coming from upstairs. Terror gripped me. Someone was inside the house. How did he get in? My mind raced, fear pumping through my veins. I clutched the poker tighter, my knuckles turning white. I tiptoed towards the stairs, each creak of the floorboard sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. The footsteps were getting closer. They were coming from the master bedroom. I took a deep breath and charged into the room, the poker raised above my head. And then I saw him, the old man. He was standing by the window, his back to me. He was holding something in his hand. It glinted in the moonlight, a knife. My blood ran cold. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise. "You shouldn't have seen that, son," he rasped, his voice cold and menacing. "Now I have to silence you." He lunged at me, the knife glinting dangerously. I reacted instinctively, swinging the poker with all my might. It connected with his arm and he cried out in pain, the knife clattering to the floor. I didn't hesitate. I ran for my life, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I stumbled and fell, scrambling to get back on my feet. He was getting closer, his ragged breathing echoing in the hallway. I barricaded myself in the living room, pushing furniture against the door. My phone! I had to call the police. My fingers fumbled with the phone, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The old man was pounding on the door, his voice a guttural roar. "Let me in, son. This is my house. I built this house with my own 2 hands." His words pierced through my fear. His house. What was he talking about? The police siren wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. He was shouting again, his voice cracking with emotion. Her name was Mary. We were supposed to grow old together in this house, but she got sick, and then... His voice broke, choked with sobs. The police were at the door, their voices sharp and commanding. They broke down the barricade and apprehended the old man. He went with them quietly, his eyes filled with a lifetime of sorrow. Later, at the police station, I learned the truth. The old man's name was Robert. He had indeed built that house with his wife, Mary. They never had children, and when she died, he lost everything. He ended up on the streets, his mind clouded with grief and dementia. He would often wander back to the neighborhood, drawn to the only place he ever felt truly at home. He never meant to hurt anyone. He was just lost, alone, and desperately clinging to the memory of his beloved Mary. I sat by the fireplace that Christmas morning, a wave of sadness washing over me. The house didn't feel so cozy anymore. It felt heavy, burdened by a lifetime of memories, both happy and heartbreakingly sad. I thought of Robert, alone in his cell, his mind lost in the shadows of the past. And I realized that sometimes the scariest things aren't the things that go bump in the night, but the ghosts of memories that haunt us all. It was Christmas Eve, and the whole world seemed to be celebrating. Carols were playing faintly from a neighbour's house. The aroma of baking cookies wafted in from somewhere down the street. But inside my home, there was only an unsettling silence. My family was out of town. A last-minute work emergency had grounded me. So there I was, alone on Christmas Eve. I missed my wife and kids terribly. The large, empty house felt colder and more cavernous than usual. Even the brightly lit Christmas tree in the corner seemed to amplify the silence rather than break it. I felt a pang of sadness, wishing I could be with my family, wishing I could just turn off the quiet. To distract myself, I went into the kitchen to make a cup of hot chocolate. As I waited for the milk to heat, I glanced back at the living room and the Christmas tree. That's when I noticed it. A gift I hadn't seen before, sitting alone under the tree. It was a medium-sized box, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with twine. My brow furrowed. I hadn't ordered anything online and my family was already away. Who could have left a gift and why? Curiosity piqued. I walked towards the tree, my socks sinking into the plush carpet. A shiver went down my spine, though whether from the cold or something else I couldn't tell. The plain brown paper was unrevealing, offering no clue as to the sender or the contents. There was no tag, no card, no indication whatsoever of who it was from. I picked it up. The box was surprisingly heavy and cold to the touch, as if it had been stored somewhere without heating. It felt oddly out of place amidst the colourful wrapping paper and cheerful decorations of the other presents. I turned it over and over in my hands, my unease growing. Who would leave a gift like this? Was it some kind of prank? Or worse, was it something more sinister? My mind started to conjure up images from every horror movie I'd ever seen. The silence of the house seemed to amplify every creak and groan, turning the familiar surroundings into something strange and unsettling. I stood there for a long moment, debating whether to open it or just throw it away. Curiosity, as it so often does, got the better of me. I told myself it was probably just a harmless mistake, a case of wrong delivery. With hesitant hands, I began to untie the twine. Each tug seemed to heighten the silence around me, making my heart pound in my ears. The brown paper yielded easily, revealing a plain wooden box beneath. It was old and worn, the wood dark with age. There were no markings on it, no engravings, nothing that could provide a hint about its origins. Holding my breath, I slowly lifted the lid of the box. It creaked open, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red velvet, lay a single old photograph. It was a sepia-toned image of a man I had never seen before. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a stiff collar and a waistcoat. His face was stern, his eyes staring directly at the camera with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. It felt like he was looking directly at me, into me. Section 4. The Nightmare Before Christmas. Later that night, I tried to shake off the unease from earlier. I forced myself to eat some leftover takeout, half-heartedly watched some TV, and eventually turned in for the night. But sleep, when it came, was not a respite. Instead, I was plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams. The man from the photograph was everywhere. He stood at the foot of my bed, his eyes boring into me. He peered at me from the shadows in the hallway. He even sat across from me at the dinner table, his presence silent but heavy. In my dream, his clothes were always the same, the old-fashioned suit, the stiff collar, but his face seemed to shift, his expression alternating between sorrow, anger, and a chilling sense of possessiveness. Each time I woke up with a start, heart hammering, only to find myself alone in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Finally, as dawn approached, I drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by the image of the man and the weight of his unseen presence. It felt like more than just a bad dream. It felt like a warning. When I woke up, the heavy silence of the house and the unsettling memory of the dream lingered. The strange gift, the old photograph, the haunting dream. I stumbled out of bed, feeling a chill despite the winter sun. I needed to get out, breathe in some fresh air. As I walked past the living room, my eyes were drawn to the Christmas tree. And that's when I froze. The gift box was back under the tree. I stood there, my mind reeling. I could have sworn I had left it on the coffee table. I had even considered throwing it away, but something had stopped me. With trembling hands, I reached out and picked up the box. It felt even colder than before. I opened it, dreading but needing to see the photograph again. And there he was. The man in the old-fashioned clothes stared back at me, his eyes as piercing as ever. But this time, there was something different. Tucked into the corner of the photograph, I noticed a small handwritten inscription on the back. It read, "Thomas Ashton, 1889. This house, my legacy, it's still mine." Panic seized me. Thomas Ashton, this house. It was all starting to feel terrifyingly real. I had to find out more about this man, about this house. I rushed to my computer and started searching online, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It didn't take long to find information about the house's history. The local historical society had records dating back to the 19th century, and there he was again, Thomas Ashton. He had built this house in the late 1800s, a grand Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town. But his life, according to the records, had been far from grand. Thomas had been a reclusive man, obsessed with his work and his legacy. He had poured his heart and soul into building this house, only to die tragically in an accident on the property just a year after its completion. There were whispers of foul play, rumours of a disgruntled worker seeking revenge, but nothing was ever proven. As I delved deeper into Thomas's story, I felt a growing sense of unease. His obsession with the house, his tragic death, and now this photograph, it all seemed connected. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. The memory of the dream, the unsettling photograph, and Thomas Ashton's tragic fate haunted me. The house felt cold, alien, and filled with an unseen presence. I packed a bag, my hands shaking. I had to get out, find a hotel. As I rushed to the door, I glanced at the hallway mirror and saw him one last time. He stood at the end of the hallway, his reflection faint. The old-fashioned clothes, the stern face, the piercing eyes. He looked directly at me, his lips moving silently. I couldn't hear the words, but felt their chilling message. It's still mine. I fled the house. The image of his face seared into my mind. That was the day I learned some houses hold more than just memories. Some houses hold secrets, and some secrets are best left undisturbed. Christmas Eve, a time for family, for laughter, for warmth, but not for me. This year it was just me and the silence. A silence so profound it was almost deafening. The only sound, the crackling fire in the old stone fireplace. I sat there, lost in thought, staring at the flickering flames. My reflection stared back, a pale ghost in the firelight. A shiver ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the cold. There was an uneasiness in the air, a prickling at the back of my neck. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 times, each clang a hammer blow against the stillness. 8 o'clock. Still early, but the night felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken secrets. I tried to shake off the feeling. I poured myself another glass of wine, the rich aroma doing little to dispel the growing unease. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows. I pulled my shawl tighter around me, seeking comfort in its warmth. I was alone, yes, but not entirely alone. I was in charge of the old cabin, nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It was my uncle's, a place of solace for him, a refuge from the city's clamour. Now with him gone, it was mine to look after. It was a beautiful old place, with its weathered wooden beams and the scent of pine needles clinging to the air. But it was also isolated, cut off from the world by miles of winding roads and dense forest. In the daylight, the solitude was almost peaceful. But at night, the silence was a living, breathing thing. My duties were simple. Keep the place aired, the fire going, and make sure no critters found their way in. It was a small price to pay for the peace and quiet the cabin offered, or so I told myself. Earlier that day, I had tried to bring some Christmas cheer to the isolated cabin. I had decorated a small pine tree with ornaments, their bright colours jarring against the rustic interior. I had even placed a plate of cookies and a glass of milk by the fireplace, a childhood tradition I couldn't let go of. For a brief while, the cabin had felt warm, inviting, almost festive. But as the day waned, so did the festive spirit. The shadows grew longer, creeping across the wooden floor like silent predators. Even the cheerful twinkling lights of the Christmas tree couldn't dispel the growing sense of unease that had settled over me. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the pounding of my own heart. It started subtly. A soft scratching sound from the roof, easily dismissed as a stray branch in the wind. But then came a thump, low and muffled from somewhere downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I strained my ears, listening intently. Silence. Perhaps it was just the old house settling, the wind playing tricks on my nerves. But then a whimper. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the wind. It was Buster, my German shepherd, usually the most placid of creatures. He was now sitting by the door, ears pricked. A low growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't take his eyes off the door, his growl intensifying. Fear, cold and clammy, tightened its grip on my chest. Shadows and whispers in the night. I crept closer to the window, my pulse quickening with each step. Peering through the frost-covered glass, I scanned the darkness outside. The wind howled, whipping the snow into a frenzy. The trees swayed ominously, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to the cabin. There was nothing. just the storm and my own reflection staring back at me. Yet the scratching sound came again, this time closer, more insistent. I spun around, my heart pounding against my ribs. My eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the sound, for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Or was there? A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow, shifting just beyond the edge of the firelight. I held my breath, every sense on high alert. A floorboard creaked upstairs, then silence, heavy and suffocating. Panic welled up inside me, threatening to consume me. I had to get out of there. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling to dial emergency services. No signal. Of course not. That's when I saw it. The front door, which I distinctly remembered bolting shut, was ajar. A cold draft snaked its way in, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else. Something unfamiliar, metallic. My gaze dropped to the floor. A muddy footprint marred the rug, a stark contrast to the pristine white snow outside. It wasn't my boot print, this was real. Someone was inside the cabin. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The fire in the hearth sputtered, casting grotesque shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. "Hello?" My voice was a choked whisper, lost in the vast emptiness of the cabin. Only silence answered me. The silence of someone or something lurking in the dark. Then a crash from upstairs, loud, shattering the silence like a gunshot. I jumped, my blood turning to ice in my veins. They were inside, they were in the cabin. Terror, raw and primal, surged through me. I stumbled back, my hand frantically searching for something, anything, to defend myself. I was trapped, cowering in the darkness, the silence punctuated by the frantic beating of my own heart. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming down the stairs. Each step was an agonizing hammer blow to my sanity. Closer and closer they came, until they stopped just outside the pool of firelight. I held my breath, my eyes desperately trying to pierce the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, a dark silhouette against the dying embers of the fire. I couldn't make out his features, but I could feel his eyes boring into me. He took a step closer, and the firelight flickered, momentarily illuminating his face. It was a face I'd never forget, a face etched with a chilling blend of curiosity and malice. He spoke then, his voice low and guttural, sending chills down my spine. "Don't be afraid," he said, the words dripping with false reassurance. "I won't hurt you." Much. I didn't wait to hear anything more. Scrambling back, I threw myself against the wall, my hand closing around a heavy iron poker that lay discarded by the fireplace. It was a slim chance, but it was all I had. As he lunged towards me, I swung the poker with all my might. It connected with a sickening thud, and he cried out in pain, momentarily stunned. It was my only opportunity. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the trees. The sound of my own ragged breathing, the only sound in the vast, unforgiving darkness. Now, years later, I still think about that night. The isolation, the fear, the chilling encounter with the stranger in the cabin. He was never caught. The police dismissed it as a break-in gone wrong, but I know the truth. And the memory of his face, etched forever in my mind, still haunts my dreams. The stranger may have vanished into the night, but the terror he left behind lingers on. A chilling reminder that even in the most remote corners of the world, darkness can find you.